Today's product focus is going to be on the Motorola Maxtrac and Radius. You can see that both of these radios look very similar to one another, however they were marketed at or targeted at two different markets. The Radius line was marketed towards the commercial user, like say a construction company or a tow company, whereas opposed to the Maxtrac was usually marketed towards government agencies, public safety agencies such as police and fire, and because of these two different markets, the features are slightly different. You'll notice that on the Radius, the monitor light is on, whereas the Maxtrac it's not. This is called forced monitor, this feature. The reason why this has a forced monitor feature is because these radios are usually used on a community repeater. And on a community repeater, the repeater supports multiple companies using the same repeater without having to have each company hear one another. They only hear their people and their own people within their group. They do that by, on the repeater, they assign a PL tone to each group. So say a construction company using this repeater would have a PL tone of 94.8, whereas a tow company on the same repeater might have a PL tone of 141.3. And they don't have to hear one another, provided the microphone is actually in the microphone clip. You'll notice that when we put the mic in the clip, the monitor light shuts off. It shuts off because that's the standard mode. In this mode, you'll only have to hear the people in your company or your own group. When you take the mic out of the clip to talk, you notice that the monitor light comes on, which forces you to monitor the repeater to make sure nobody else is talking before you talk. All right? That's not a programmable feature in the Radius line. There's nothing in the software that allows that feature to be toggled on and off. Whereas the Maxtrac does have that's adjustable in the software, whether the forced monitor is on or off. For PEG, we don't need the forced monitor because you have your own repeater to yourself. You're not sharing it with other people on the same repeater. So the Maxtrac features a selectable forced monitor option, whereas this one, the Radius, does not. The only way to modify the Radius is to physically go in and modify the radio so that feature doesn't function like that anymore. So when you take the microphone off the hook, it's still in decode mode. Alright, so that's one of the more obvious features of the two. They both are 60 watts. They both have, depending on the channels, they both could have anywhere from 2 channels up to 32. The Radius line was made in a 2-channel model, a 6-channel, an 8-channel, and I believe a 16-channel. Whereas the Maxtrac was made in a 2-channel, an 8-channel, a 16, and a 32, if I remember right. The 2-channel models are as basic gets. They have no real features. Basically, they're just 2-channel radios. They do not have scan. They do not have any kind of other features, including you cannot use an XTR system with these. Really, the only thing that these 2-channels radios are good for is, for personal use anyway, is to use them in a PEG system that's a simplex-based system. And you cannot use these with an XTR, as I mentioned, so only a simplex 2-channel system would you be able to use these radios, so they're not really that useful. You will find that there are far more full-featured Maxtrac radios out there than there are Radius ones. And the reason why that is because the government agencies are just going to go out and buy the best that they can buy, whereas the commercial user is going to buy the features that they need. So, although the Radius line is available with full-featured 16-channel, it's more common to see versions of the radio like this where they're lacking buttons, lacking signaling, which is the PTT ID and the other digital features that I talked about in some of the other videos. But let's take a quick look now at the back of a basic radio. On the basic radio, you'll see that there's an accessory port. This is known as a 5-pin logic board basic radio with a 5-pin accessory jack. The only thing this accessory jack offers to the average user is that it has an output for ignition switched input so that you can turn the radio on with the ignition. Other than that, this port is virtually useless. It will not support XTR systems, so it's not really the desirable version of the radio. That's why US Preparatory, that's why I go out of my way to get the right radios for PEG instead of having people try to get the radios themselves. You'll see that all the Motorola's use a mini UHF connector, which is a small version of a PL259 or SO239 connector, and they use a standard friction fit DC input jack. Now, in contrast, if we look at the Maxtrac being a full-featured radio, you see a very different look. This is a 16-pin logic board with a 16-pin accessory port. This is fully programmable, and this is configured on all of our radios to work with an XTR system. So without this 16-pin port, there is no you can't use an XTR with the standard 5-pin accessory port. Again, same connector, same mini UHF, and same friction fit DC jack. One of the other features that are unique to the Maxtrac versus the Radius is that the Maxtrac had the ability, and you can see on this is a dummy plug. You see the two jumpers? One of these jumpers is jumped to bypass an emergency switch. Since these were typically used for public safety, you can wire in an emergency switch into these two pins here. And that switch, we would typically install that switch on the floor of a police cruiser or on the dash of a police cruiser. And if the police officer was to get in trouble while sitting in his vehicle, he could hit that button with his foot or his hand and trigger the PTT ID emergency signal to the dispatcher to get help. That's one of the features that are only available on the Maxtrac and not the Radius. The other jumper is a speaker jumper. If you don't have a jumper in pins 15 and 16, or you don't have a physical jumper actually on the pins themselves, the internal speaker will no longer function. That's so that you can set up an external speaker on these radios. Now let's power the radios back up. I'll swap these. This is more of a full-featured Radius radio, which is more of the rare ones. You will notice, though, that how this one has no buttons, no extra buttons. This is a 6-channel model. This is a 8-channel model, which has signaling capability, but you'll notice it doesn't have a scan button. It has an exit button instead. Some of the other features I'll go over now. On radios that do support scan, you can have as many scan lists as you do channels. So if you have 6 channels, you can have 6 individual scan lists. With whatever channel you place the radio on becomes the priority channel when you hit scan. If we hit scan now, you'll see that it's in standby mode scan. It's not actually scan, and that's because the microphone needs to be plugged in and it has to be in the clip. You'll notice that it shows now that it is in scan. It's also, when it reaches the priority channel, it will beep to indicate that there's traffic on the priority channel. Alright, so as soon as you take the mic off the hook, it goes out of scan mode. You can see that the priority light is flashing because, remember I said that whatever channel you put it on and then hit scan, that becomes the priority. So basically it's looking back and forth to the priority channel right now. But it's not actually scanning until you put it back in the clip. That's so when you take out the microphone from the clip and you start talking and you let go to listen, that it doesn't start scanning while you're trying to listen to somebody that you're talking to. All right. One of the other features that is very specific to the low band version of the Radius and Maxtracs, a feature that doesn't exist on the VHF and UHF models of these same model designations, is that the low band radios have a special feature. The feature is called a noise blanker. On lower frequencies, usually frequencies below 100 megahertz, the noise blanker feature is used to filter out certain types of noise. You can bypass that noise blanker if you want in the low band radios. I'll show you how to do it. If you push and hold, if you push the monitor button, it goes in and toggles the monitor feature on and off. That essentially is when the monitor light is on, the decoder for PL decoding is off. It's disabled. When it's in that's normal mode for a PL decoding and encoding. Okay? If you push and hold the monitor button, it'll open the squelch up. Okay? However, if you push and hold it for 2 beeps instead of 1, you see the dash that shows up. The dash indicates that the noise blanker is temporarily disabled. And in a circumstance, the reason why you might want to disable it is certain types of noise. If the noise blanker circuit is active, it is possible that it could desensitize the receiver's sensitivity. It's very rare. The kind of noise that we usually get nowadays is not pulse noise, but digital noise. And the noise blanker circuit's not really designed to filter out that kind of noise, because that noise wasn't even around when these radios were new. But anyway, that's how you would bypass it. To get out of it, you do the same thing. Push and hold for 2 beeps. So that's on. That's off. The other way you can do it is if it was on, you could just shut the radio off and turn it back on, and that will, of course, disable the noise blanker, or actually re-enable it. Putting in, this is the standard mode, is the noise blanker on the low band radios are typically on by default. And that will work, that bypass will work on any of the low band Radius and Maxtrac radios only, and it'll only do on the low band models. The VHF and UHF models, as I said, don't have that feature. They're both 60 watts. They were available in 2-channel models like we have here. I want to stress too that the 2-channel model is of very little value to a PEG user. The only use for a 2-channel model really is if you happen to have a PEG simplex system. Other than that, they're really useless, because they do not support PTT ID. They do not have the 16-pin logic board, so you can't use them with an XTR. They, of course, do not have scan and do not have any other features. One of the other features that these have, if they're programmed, you'll notice that you have a select button on both of these radios. There are some other features that the radios can be programmed for using the MDC 1200 digital burst ID. It's used for more than just an ID. If we push this select button, you'll see that the radio goes into CA, which is call alert. The call alert feature is used so that if you were trying to call somebody on the radio and they didn't answer, you could essentially put the call alert on, dial in the ID of whatever they were, say they had an ID of 3, and then key the radio. What that does is it sends out a burst that only their radio identifies, and when they come back in their vehicle, they'll see their display flashing and beeping. That's if they leave their radio on. Now, I haven't actually tried that through a PEG repeater yet, but it certainly works on simplex. Anyway, that's one of the features. There's also another one. I don't think it's programmed in here. No, it's not. There's also another feature that would say CH, which indicates check, which means radio check. You'd be able to do the same thing. You'd be able to radio check the radio to see if it's getting back to a certain location of another radio. And there is one other feature. I can't recall what it's called, but it's another feature that most people won't even use. But anyway, that's a brief overview of the Maxtrac and the Radius line of radios. Both are very suitable and usable in the PEG radio system. Again, they're 60 watts of power, and they come in various channels, versions, but let us take care of that for you, because there is a lot of different models out there, and they do have to be specifically programmed for use in a PEG system. And like I said, all of these radios are programmed to work with an XTR, whether you get one during the purchase of the radio or afterwards. They're pre-configured for that. So that pretty much concludes the product focus for the Maxtrac and the Radius by Motorola.